A very good afternoon and a warm welcome to all the doctors present here. I am Debolina from Clinic. Let me take this opportunity to introduce Clinic with all of you. As you all know, Clinic is India's largest live digital CME and doctors-generated medical content platform. So now with all of you, I'm going to share a short glimpse of Clinic. Thank you so much all for your patience. You all are invited to visit our website, which is www.clinic.com. So now, without further delay, I would like to hand over the session to Dr. Hamida Mustafa ma'am to start with our today's program. Over to you.
Thank you, Debal. Welcome, ma'am, and very good evening and warm welcome to all. I'm Hamida Mustafa, doing pre-final year MBBS in Government Thiruvarur Medical College and State Coordinator SNO Tamil Nadu. I feel really elated to see from across this nation have joined this webinar. IMA JDN has been doing plethora of webinars with on various topics with objective of disseminating knowledge and keeping the medical community informed and updated. IMA JDN, in collaboration with SNO Tamil Nadu, under the guidance of Dr. Abul Hassan Sir, presents the webinar on the topic Spinal Cord and its internal features. The patrons of our webinar are Dr. Abul Hassan Sir, a well-acclaimed pediatric surgeon from Erode. Sir is the chairperson of IMA JDN Tamil Nadu and also the IMA TN State President-elect 2024. I would like to mention the organizers for today's session, Dr. Venkatesh Karthikeyan Sir, a well-acclaimed community and family medicine PG from AIIMS Patna, also General Secretary of IMA JDN Tamil Nadu. I feel honored to introduce the speaker for today's session, Dr. Surya Karthikeyan ma'am, MD Anatomy. Now she's working as an assistant professor at Government OT Medical College, the Nilgiris. If you have any queries, kindly drop it in the chat box. All the queries will be addressed at the end of the session. So without wasting much time, now I request Dr. Surya Karthikeyan ma'am to take over the session.
Very good evening to everyone. I'll start sharing my screen. Okay, can you able to see? Shall I start?
Yes, ma'am, your screen is visible. You can proceed.
Yeah, a very good evening to all. Today's class is a continuation of last class. In last class, I was talking about the external features of spinal cord. Today, I'll be completing about the internal features of spinal cord. So in last class itself, I've given a clinical scenario, that is, a 21-year-old man was involved in a head-on collision. So when removed from a sports car, he complained of loss of sensation and voluntary movements in his lower limbs. So here the point to be noted is it is an accidental injury, a sports injury. The person complained of loss of sensation and voluntary movements in his lower limbs. And there was also impaired ability of upper limb movements. There was also impaired ability of the upper limb movements, particularly in his hands. The patient was kept warm and immobilized until the ambulance arrived. After examination at the hospital, the radiographs of vertebral columns were taken. The radiologist reported as there is a dislocation of C6 vertebra on C7. So the diagnosis is dislocation of C6 vertebra on C7. And there is a chip fracture of the anterior superior corner of body of C7. There is a chip fracture in the anterior superior corner of the body of C7. So here the lesion is around C6 and C7. Now, what is the problems? What are the problems to be discussed in this clinical scenario? The first thing is, what is the anatomical basis behind loss of voluntary control in lower limb? We have got the report that there is a lesion at C6 and C7 level. Okay, so we all know that brachial plexus is supplying the upper limb. So there should be some connection between the lesions involving upper limb. But here they have given the patient has lost voluntary control in the lower limb. So there is some connection between the lesion and also the loss of movements and loss of voluntary control in lower limb. And what was the most likely cause of patient's paralysis? And then what is the reason for impaired ability of upper limb movements? At the end of this session, you'll be getting answer for all these questions. So I'm moving on to the topic proper, a small introduction on the spinal cord. It is one of the most complex yet quite a fascinating part of nervous system. It is quite complex structure, but it is very fascinating to know about the spinal cord. Its complex connections, the developmental defects, the lesions, and the clinical presentations are quite overwhelming. We cannot correlate, we cannot connect all these things. It will be very complex, and without understanding the anatomy of the spinal cord, it will be very complex to understand all these structures. So even the clinical presentation also will be finding very difficult to find out where is the lesion and how it is connected to these deformities and all. Okay, so it warrants a better understanding about the anatomy and also the physiological nature. You have to know about both the anatomy and physiology of the spinal cord. So in this session, I'll be talking about the a little bit embryology behind the development of spinal cord. That is about the nervous system, mainly about the spinal cord. And I'll I'll talk about the internal features of the spinal cord in the introduction. And I'll talk about the characteristic features of spinal segments. So we should know about the spinal segments. And then we all know spinal cord is actually composed of gray matter and white matter. So I'll be talking about the gray matter, the nucleus in the gray matter, the nerve cell groups in the gray columns, and also about the white matter. So white matter is mainly composed of tracts. So I'll be talking about a little bit about the tracts also. So I'll start with embryology. So you all know the embryology. We have the 3 germ layers. What are the 3 germ layers? It is the ectoderm. The outermost covering is the ectoderm, and the middle layer will be the mesoderm, and the inner layer will be the endoderm. So it is a trilaminar germ disc. Initially, during the initial stages of development, it is only a bilaminar structure. Only there are 2 layers. Only there will be the ectoderm and the endoderm. And then at the end of gastrulation, when the gastrulation is completed, the embryonic disc will become a trilaminar structure. So here, the ectoderm of the trilaminar staged embryo. The ectoderm of the trilaminar staged embryo. To understand this, we have to understand this diagram first. This is the different stages of embryo. This is the embryo at different stages of life, okay, in the intrauterine life. So first, this is the cranial caudal orientation. This will be the cranial end, and this will be the caudal end of embryo. We are seeing the embryo from the superior aspect. That is, we have removed the amniotic cavity from here. We are seeing only the ectodermal part, and then below this, we have the mesoderm and the endoderm. So the amniotic cavity has been removed here, and we are seeing the embryo in the craniocaudal orientation. This is cranial end, caudal end, right side, and then left side of the embryo. What happens is, in this ectoderm, in the neuroectoderm, there appears a depression. In the midline, there appears a depression. This depression is called as neural plate. So this depression is called as neural plate. What happens to this neural plate? It deepens further. It deepens further to form the neural folds on either sides. So when the neural plate deepens further, it forms the neural folds on either side. The neural fold, they will be connecting posteriorly to form the neural tube. For example, I'll take a paper here. So consider this as a ectoderm. So there appears a depression in the middle. Okay, so there appears a depression in the middle. So that what happens, the neural fold, the both ends are called as neural fold now. And this is the cranial end, and this will be the caudal end. So the neural plate deepens to form the neural groove, and then on either end, it will be the neural fold. The neural fold, it unites to form the neural tube. When the neural fold united, it forms a neural tube. So this is the cranial end of the neural tube, and this is the caudal end of the neural tube. So what you are seeing here is the united ends of neural folds in the middle. Okay, and this will be the cranial end where it is still open, and then caudal end of the neural tube also, it is still open in this stage. In further stages of the embryo development, what happens? The cranial neuropore closes. The cranial end of neuropore also closes, and the caudal end of the neuropore also closes. Initially, it is simply a plate. It deepens to form a groove, and then on either side, there will be neural fold. The neural fold unite to form the neural tube, and then the cranial end, it is open, and then caudal end also, it is open. And then in further stages of development, the cranial end means the upper end, the upper part, it will form bulges. it will form bulges and it is going to form the future brain. It will be forming the cranial end will form the future brain, whereas the caudal part remains tubular. It is going to form the future spinal cord. So in this stage, what happens? The caudal part will be forming the future spinal cord. So at around 25th day of intrauterine life, the cranial neuropore closes. And then what happens to the caudal neuropore? It also closes at around 28th day of intrauterine life. So the closure of cranial neuropore or rostral neuropore happens at 25th day of intrauterine life. The closure of caudal neuropore happens at around 28th day of intrauterine life. This can be asked as a NEET PG question for you. They'll be surely asking about neurulation. What is gastrulation, neurulation, how neural tube is formed, how neural folds are formed, and then what happens to the cranial end and what happens to the caudal end. So we have got the answer that cranial end is going to form the future brain, and then caudal end is going to form the spinal cord. And then cranial end, the neuropore closes by 25th day, caudal end, the neuropore closes by 28th day. Okay, so that's what given here. The ectoderm of the trilaminar staged embryo will thicken at the midline to be called as neural plate. And then this plate depresses, it deepens to form a neural groove, okay, whose ends later fuse to convert it into a neural tube. Initially, it was a flat structure. When it deepens and then it unites, it will form a tubular structure. This tube enlarges at the cranial end and then remains tubular at the caudal end. The cranial end is going to form the brain, and the spinal cord develops from the caudal tubular part of the neural tube. So what happens then? So now we know the neural tube has been formed, the cranial neuropore and then rostral neuropore, caudal neuropore, everything has been closed. Now what happens? Now the differentiation happens. Initially it is a single tube. No, this tube will be differentiated into 3 layers. These 3 layers are called as ependymal layer. From inner to out, these 3 layers can be named as ependymal layer, mantle layer, and then marginal layer. So the ependymal layer, histologically, when you see a spinal cord sections or the cerebral sections and all, you will be seeing these, you can appreciate these layers, these 3 layers, ependymal, mantle, and then marginal layer. This ependymal layer is nothing but it will be lining the central canal. The central canal, the spinal cord, the center, we have a canal, okay, the central canal in which the CSF is circulating. The CSF of the spinal cord in the central canal, it will communicate with the ventricular system of the brain. It has a communication with the ventricular system of the brain. Okay, so these central canal, it is actually lined by the ependymal cells. A single epithelial, single group of cells, single layer of cells will be there. That is the ependymal cells lining the central canal of the spinal cord. Then what happens to the mantle layer? In the mantle layer, future, it will be forming the gray matter. So spinal cord, the gray matter is derived from the mantle layer. What happens to the marginal layer? The marginal layer is going to form the white matter of the spinal cord. That's what's given here. The neural tube will be differentiating itself into ependymal layer, mantle layer, and marginal layers from inside out. What happens to the mantle layer? It proliferates rapidly to form the gray matter. What happens to the marginal layer? The axons of the neuron start occupying the marginal zone during the 4th week of gestation. During the 4th week of gestation, the axons of the neurons will be occupying the marginal zone that will be forming the tracts. So whenever we are talking about the spinal cord, it has an inner gray matter and outer white matter. What is this gray matter and white matter? Why it is white in color? Why it is gray in color? We all know the answer. The gray matter is actually composed of only the cell bodies, nerve cell bodies, neuroglial cells, and then we have the dendrites. What are the parts of a neuron? So we all know it has a cell body, and then short processes called as dendrites, and then single long processes called as axons. Okay, so the cell bodies, nucleus, dendrites, axon terminals will all be occupying the gray matter of the spinal cord, but while the white matter is composed of mainly the axons. Only the axons of the neurons, they will be bundling, they'll be forming the bundles, they'll be forming the fibers, they'll be forming the tracks within the white matter. So these axons, they'll be forming ascending and descending tracks within the marginal zone, the future white matter of the spinal cord. In last class, I already told you the length of the spinal cord will be around, it is around 45 centimeter in length. In adult, it will be ending at the level of lower border of L1. And then what happens in pediatrics? It will be ending at the level of L3. Okay. So in adult, it will end at the lower border of L1. In newborn and all, it will be ending at the level of L3. And what happens in intrauterine life? Actually, up to 3rd month of life, both the spinal cord and vertebral column, they are equal in size. They'll be growing in equal in size. Okay, up to 3rd month of life. After that, what happens? The vertebral column, it will proliferate rapidly. It will grow rapidly, whereas the spinal cord will be growing very slowly. And when compared to the spinal cord growth, the vertebral column will be growing rapidly. That's why during birth, what happens? The vertebral column is still growing, but the spinal cord, it will be ending at the level of L3. When it reaches the puberty, it will be at the level of L1. So the length of the spinal cord and the vertebral column are equal in size up to 3rd month of fetal life. Later, the vertebral column develops rapidly in comparison to the spinal cord. Thus, the spinal cord ends at higher level within the vertebral canal. It has receded to the 3rd lumbar vertebra at birth, and it reaches around 1st lumbar vertebra by puberty. This is what asked in the NEET questions. In adult, the spinal cord ends at the level of lower border of L1. In newborn, it is ending at the level of L3. Okay, thus the spinal nerves arising from the spinal cord, they are at the much higher level than their exit out through the intervertebral foramen. The spinal nerves, the spinal nerves will be arising from the spinal cord. They will be exiting through the intervertebral foramens. They will not follow the same pattern because the T12 spinal nerve will not exit at exact intervertebral foramen of T12. It will be at the much higher levels. Okay. So coming to the internal features, the spinal cord's most important function is to receive, integrate, associate the input, and produce a reflex response. So what information it is receiving? We are telling it is receiving information, it is integrating the information, it is associating the input, and then producing a reflex response. Actually, the sensory inputs are carried to the spinal cord through the sensory neurons. We have a different type of neurons, motor neurons, sensory neurons, and interneurons. So the sensory inputs are carried to the spinal cord, and from there it will be relayed to the motor neurons, to the interneurons, and from the motor neurons we are getting the efferents, that is the outputs. Okay, that will be the reflex. So this is mediated locally at the spinal cord level, and then through the tracts, it can be relayed to the cortex also. So some sensory information, it will be relayed through the fibers or tracts to the cerebral cortex. From the cerebral cortex, again, we'll be getting the motor outputs. Okay, the motor output is through the descending tracts. So the important function is receiving, integrating, associating the input, and also producing the reflex response. This is mainly about the spinal cord. Okay, and then the inner column is the inner center thing is the gray matter, and then outer is the white matter. So the inner gray matter is made up of nerve cell bodies, neuroglial cells, and also it is composed of blood vessels. So this is the cross section of spinal cord. So when we take this is one spinal segment. What is one spinal segment? That is a spinal nerve arising from a certain part of the spinal cord. It is called a spinal segment. A single spinal nerve arising from the part of the spinal cord will be termed a single spinal segment. For example, we take it as a T1 segment. If we take it as a T1 segment, this is a T1 spinal nerve, which is arising as a several nerve rootlets. Can you see? Can you make out these things? It will be arising as a several nerve rootlets. All these will combine to form a single root, single anterior root or ventral root. So this is ventral root of spinal nerve, and then we have the dorsal root of spinal nerve. So all these will be arising as a nerve rootlets. So coming to the gray matter, in the section of gray matter, this gray matter is actually H-shaped, H or butterfly shape. It is divided into equal halves. Can you make out? It is divided into two equal halves, right half and then left half, by an central commissure. This is called as transverse gray commissure, which will divide the gray matter into two equal halves. Okay, and then the central, we have the central canal, in which we have the CSF, which is be communicating with the ventricular system of the brain. Okay, and then outer, we have the outer white matter. In the outer white matter, can you make out some fissures? When I was talking about the external features of the spinal cord, I told you about these things. There is an fissure anteriorly. There is an fissure anteriorly, which will be extending deep into the substance of white matter. This fissure is called as anterior median fissure. The anterior median fissure extends into white substance of the white matter, and then it will be dividing the white matter and also into two halves. And then posteriorly we have a sulcus, that is the posterior median sulcus, that will be extending like a posterior median septum. Only there is a depression that is called as posterior median sulcus. From the sulcus there is a septum which will be extending into the white matter of the spinal cord. Okay, so these posterior median sulcus, posterior median septum, and anterior median fissure divides the white matter also into two equal halves. Okay, so the gray matter is head-shaped or butterfly-shaped. The transverse gray commissure in the center, it divides the gray matter into symmetrical halves. Okay, two halves, and then the central canal of the cord passes through the center of the gray commissure. So we know the gray matter, the gray column or the gray matter, it is actually head-shaped. And when you see this, we have the central canal, and around the central canal there is a portion. Around the central canal there is a portion. Initially I said it is a transverse gray commissure. The transverse gray commissure around the central canal is called as substantia gelatinosa centralis. That is called as substantia gelatinosa centralis. And then the gray matter, it is divided into anterior horn and then posterior horn. When you make out the posterior horn is slender, whereas anterior horn is broad. It is divided into broad anterior horn and then slender, thin posterior horn. This posterior horn will be reaching the surface of the spinal cord. When we make out, it is actually reaching the surface of the spinal cord. But anterior column, it is falling short of it. Okay, it is just broad, but it is falling short of it. It is not reaching the surface. But whereas the posterior horn, it reaches the surface of the spinal cord. So in thoracic segments and upper lumbar segments, for example, L1 and L2 and all, we have a lateral projection also. We all know in all the spinal segments, we have the anterior horn and then posterior horn, but there is another one horn called lateral horn. The lateral horn will be seen only in the thoracic spinal segments and upper lumbar segments, that is at L1 and L2 level. The posterior horn extends almost up to the surface of the cord, whereas the anterior horn falls short of it. So in thoracic segments and upper two lumbar segments, there is a triangular projection laterally. Okay, that is called as lateral horn. So this is the anterior horn, lateral horn, and posterior horn. So this is the spinal segment at thoracic level. So there are some characteristic features. We have to difference between the cervical spinal segments. I told you, the spinal segment is nothing but a single spinal nerve arising from the spinal cord. That part of the spinal cord is termed as spinal segment. So in cervical region, we have spinal segments. Thoracic region, we have spinal segments. So we have totally 31 pairs of spinal nerves. So there should be 31 spinal segments. We should be differentiating between the cervical spinal segments, thoracic spinal segments, and lumbar spinal segments. So each one has a characteristic feature. So we are going to see the characteristic feature in detail. So this is the cervical region, cervical spinal segments, thoracic, and then lumbar. So when you see the gray matter in the cervical region, it is large, okay. But when in thoracic region, it is very small. And then again in lumbar region, the gray matter will be large, okay. And then coming to the posterior horn of gray matter in the cervical region, it is slender and extends posteriorly. Whereas in the thoracic segments, it is slender, it will be reaching laterally. Okay, in the lumbar segment, it is bulbar or bulbous. It is not slender, it will be bulbous. Which one? The posterior horn. And coming to the anterior horn. The anterior horn will be massive in cervical region, whereas in the thoracic region, it is slender. And again, in the lumbar region, it will be bulbous in nature. And coming to the lateral horn, it is seen only at the thoracic spinal segments. All the thoracic spinal segments, they have a lateral horn. And also upper lumbar segments, that is L1 and L2 will have a lateral horn. But it is absent in case of cervical spinal segments. And coming to the reticular formation, can you see these are the reticular formation? The reticular formation, it is well developed in cervical spinal segments, whereas in the thoracic spinal segment, it is poorly developed. It is absent in lumbar segments. So we have to differentiate the spinal segment. They have the characteristic features. With the help of this, we have to differentiate all these things. Okay. So I'm going in detail about the gray matter. Okay. So at first I told you it has an anterior horn, posterior horn, and center canal is there. The part around the central canal will be the substantia gelatinosa centralis, and we have the transverse gray commissure here. And in the thoracic segment and the upper lumbar segment, we have the lateral horns. Okay. So the gray matter, it is composed of nerve cell bodies. Throughout my presentation, you have to keep it in mind. Whenever I'm talking about the gray matter, it is composed of nerve cell bodies. Only the cell bodies of a neuron it is in the gray matter. Okay, and the dendrites are present in the gray matter, whereas the axons of the neurons, they'll be seen only in the white matter. Okay. And then because of the axons are myelinated and it is rich in myelin, the white matter is white in color. Okay, because of the presence of the myelin only, the white matter is white in color. Why? Because of the presence of myelin, it should be white, because the myelin is rich in lipids. The lipids will give it a white color appearance. So the axons, it is in the white matter. It is composed of myelinated axons mainly. Because of the presence of myelin and the lipids, it is having the white color appearance. So when we talk about the gray matter, it is only the nerve cell bodies and the neuroglial cells. Neuroglial cells are nothing but the supporting tissues. Supporting tissues for the neurons are called as neuroglial cells. And then we have some blood vessels in the gray matter. Okay. And then type of neurons. Initially, when I started itself, I told you there are different type of neurons. What are the different type of neurons? I told you there are sensory neurons. Sensory neurons, usually they'll be carrying the afferent fibers from the periphery. From the periphery, it will carry all the afferent fibers, which one? The sensory neurons. And then they will relay in the posterior part of the spinal cord. And then some will be transmitted to the cerebral cortex also. Through the posterior column, it will be ascending. Through the ascending tracts, it will be relaying the information in the primary sensory area of the cerebral cortex. This is about the sensory neurons. And coming to the motor neurons. Motor means it is the efferent neurons. Okay, these efferent neurons, they will be sending the information. They'll be relaying the information from the central part to the periphery, that is from the spinal cord or from the cerebral cortex. All the information, all the motor information will be giving out through the periphery, through the motor neurons. And what about the interneurons? What is called as interneurons? They are nothing but the association neurons. Interneurons, they'll be connecting the different types of neurons. That is, they will have a connection between the motor and the sensory. Because sensory, they will relay the information in the posterior part. And from the anterior part only, we are getting the motor neurons. So there should be a connection between the sensory and the motor, no? So these connections are established by the interneurons. They are otherwise called as association neurons. So these are the neurons in the gray matter. Type of neurons, they are motor neurons, sensory neurons, and then interneurons. Motor neurons, mostly they are located only in the anterior horn and then in the lateral horn. The sensory neurons, it will be located in the posterior horn. The interneurons will be present throughout the gray matter. Anywhere else we can find the interneurons. What's the main function of motor neurons? It is mainly the efferents, motor efferents. They are again subdivided into alpha motor neurons and gamma motor neurons. So the alpha motor neurons will be supplying the extrafusal fibers of skeletal muscles, whereas the gamma motor neurons, they'll be innervating the intrafusal fibers of the skeletal muscle. That is the nuclear chain fibers and then nuclear back fibers. Okay. So the sensory neurons, they relay the sensory information mainly to the brain. They'll take the information. They are the afferents. They'll relay the information mainly to the brain. Okay. Interneurons, they just connect the different type of neurons. They are the association neurons. That's all. So this is again a single spinal segment where you can see the anterior gray column, lateral column, and then posterior column of the gray matters. Okay, these are the efferent fibers. Okay, the efferent, the motor efferents, they exit out through the ventral root of spinal nerve, and then they relay the information, efferent information to the skeletal muscles. It will cause contraction of the skeletal muscles. Motor means what? It should be causing the contraction of the muscle. So here we have the contraction of the skeletal muscles. Okay. And then from the muscles, the sensory informations are carried through the afferent neurons. They are nothing but the sensory neurons. They'll be taking the information through the dorsal root. Okay, this is the dorsal root of spinal nerve. Dorsal root. They are the afferent. They are the sensory. They'll be going to the posterior gray column. All these you should actually memorize. Okay, posterior means sensory. Posterior means it is they are the afferents. They'll be coming through the dorsal root like that. Okay, and this will be relaying here. And these are the interneurons you can see. Okay, moving on to the we are going to see the nucleus in the gray columns. Now we have seen the types of neurons. We have just seen the types of neurons going to the spinal cord. But what I said, the gray matter, it is composed of nerve cell bodies. No, there are nerve cell bodies located in the anterior column, lateral column, and also in the posterior column. They will be discussed separately, like the nucleus belonging to the anterior column, the nucleus located in the lateral column, and the nucleus located in the posterior column will be discussed separately like this. Okay, and then there is one classification that is called as Rexed classification. Rexed means R-E-X-E-D. The Rexed classification divides the gray matter into 10 laminas. So the posterior horn or the posterior gray column contains lamina 1 to 6. And then the intermediate area between the posterior horn and the anterior horn, it will, one second. The posterior horn, the intermediate, the lateral columns, the intermediate area, it has we have the intermediate nucleus. Okay, and then that is the lamina 7, and then lamina 8 and 9 will be located in the anterior part of the gray matter. That is the anterior gray matter contains the lamina 8 and 9, and then lamina 10, it is situated around the central canal. So the lamina 10 is situated around the central canal. This is the group of nucleus in the gray matter. We are picturing only the gray matter here. So this is only the gray matter here, gray matter of the spinal cord. This is the anterior horn of gray matter, and this will be the intermediate area of the gray matter, and this is the posterior gray column or posterior horn of gray matter. Can you see the nucleus here? So these nucleus are differentiated, subdivided into medial groups, lateral groups, and then central groups. So the medial group of nucleus will be the ventromedial nucleus. We have the ventromedial nucleus here, and then dorsomedial nucleus. The medial group occupying the anterior gray column, they are subdivided into ventromedial nucleus. And then we have the dorsomedial nucleus here. The central group occupying the anterior gray horn, they are subdivided into phrenic nerve nucleus and accessory nerve nucleus. And then on the lateral aspect, we have all the lateral nucleuses, that is ventrolateral, dorsolateral, and retrodorsolateral nucleus. So what is all these nucleus doing here? We are telling it is composed of nerve cell bodies, and then in the Patna we have the medial group, lateral group, and then central group and all. What is actually the function of all these nucleus? These are, I told you, anterior gray horn. It is mainly concerned with motor efferents. So these nucleus, they are actually mainly concerned with the motor efferents, the motor activities. Okay. The medial group of nucleus, they will be controlling the motor activities of neck and the trunk muscles. Whereas the central group, composed of phrenic nerve nucleus and the accessory nerve nucleus. Phrenic nerve, when we tell it as a phrenic nerve, it has to supply the diaphragm. When we call it the accessory nerve nucleus. What is the accessory nerve? We have 12 pairs of cranial nerves. The 11th cranial nerve is called as spinal accessory nerve. Okay. The 11th cranial nerve is called as spinal accessory nerve. Okay. So the spinal accessory nerve has two parts. One is the spinal part and another is the accessory part. So this spinal part will have a spinal nucleus in the brainstem, whereas the accessory part of the cranial nerve will have the accessory nucleus at the spinal cord levels. Okay. This accessory nerve nucleus is present in the central group. So phrenic nerve, it will be supplying the diaphragm. Whereas the accessory nucleus, they innervate only two muscles. Motor, it is motor, no. So it will be innervating two muscles. One is the sternocleidomastoid, another is the trapezius muscle. Okay. And then we have the lateral group of nucleus. These all will be controlling the motor activities of the limbs, that is upper limb and lower limb. All the motor activities are controlled by these lateral group of nucleus. Okay. So the nerve cell groups in the anterior gray column, they can be divided into medial group, lateral group, and then central group. So it will be subdivided. Again, the medial group itself, it will be divided into ventromedial and the dorsomedial. The lateral group is divided into three subdivisions. One is ventrolateral, dorsolateral, and retrodorsolateral parts. Okay. I told you about the functions. Medial group, they will be controlling the neck and trunk muscles, whereas the lateral group, it will be supplying the limb muscles. And then central group, phrenic nerve, innervates the diaphragm, whereas the 11th cranial nerve, that is the accessory part of 11th cranial nerve, that supplies the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius. It will be supplying the sternocleidomastoid and then trapezius. Okay. Now I have completed the nucleus in the anterior gray column. Now I am going to move on to the posterior group nucleus. In the posterior horn, we have a certain set of nucleus and all. Okay, so they are termed as postero-marginal nucleus. Okay, near the apex of the posterior horn, we have the postero-marginal nucleus. And then in front of the posterior-marginal nucleus, we have the substantia gelatinosa. So when I was talking about substantia gelatinosa, already we were talking about this one, no? Around the central canal, there is a substance around the central canal. It is called a substantia gelatinosa centralis. But here also we have a nucleus named substantia gelatinosa. Here it is substantia gelatinosa of Rolando. It is nothing but the substantia gelatinosa of Rolando. And then in front of this nucleus, again, we have another nucleus that is called as nucleus proprius. See, when I was talking about this thing and all, for anatomy, you have to, no other way, you have to memorize certain names. Okay, so this is postero-marginal, substantia gelatinosa of Rolando, nucleus proprius, everything. This is very difficult to memorize, but you have to memorize and then keep it in mind. Okay, so we have the nucleus proprius in front of the substantia gelatinosa. And then more medially, we have a Clark's column nucleus, that is dorsal nucleus, or otherwise called as nucleus dorsalis. The nucleus dorsalis, dorsal nucleus, Clark's column nucleus, everything, it is located in the medial aspect in the posterior horn. So now I was talking about four nucleus. One is postero-marginal nucleus. Second is substantia gelatinosa of Rolando. Third will be nucleus proprius. And then fourth will be the dorsal nucleus or the Clark's column nucleus. So in between the nucleus proprius and the dorsal nucleus, we have another one nucleus that is called as visceral afferent nucleus. It is the visceral afferent nucleus. Okay, this is the location for the visceral afferent nucleus. So these are the nerve cell groups in posterior gray column. One is substantia gelatinosa of Rolando. Second is nucleus proprius. And then third is nucleus dorsalis, or otherwise called as Clark's column. And then fourth is visceral afferent nucleus. Okay, this is only the nucleus. So what all this nucleus are going to do? Anterior gray column, these are all concerned with motor activities. Posterior horn, it is mainly concerned with sensory afferents. Okay, so these nucleus, they are going to have the information, the sensory informations. It is going to, these all nucleus are going to receive the sensory informations from the periphery. So each nucleus will be having a separate informations. Okay, sensory informations. We are going to see that in detail now. The substantia gelatinosa of Rolando, it mainly receives the pain and temperature sensations. These are all very important. We all know about the general sensations. It can be grouped like pain, temperature, vibration, position sense, joint sense, proprioception, exteroceptions. Like this, these general sensations can be classified broadly. Okay, so we can actually feel the pain, temperature, vibration and all. Okay, these are all very important. So the substantia gelatinosa of Rolando, it receives mainly the pain and temperature sensations. Okay, what happens to the nucleus proprius? So it receives proprioception. Mainly the proprius nucleus, it will receive the proprioception sensations. Okay, and also it is associated with position sense, and also vibration sense and 2-point discrimination. So from the periphery, from the limbs and all, these sensations are carried to the spinal cord. At what level it reaches the spinal cord? The pain sensations, temperature sensations will reach the substantia gelatinous of Rolando. Whereas the position sense and then vibration sense, we have the 2-point discrimination. What does mean by 2-point discrimination? When we can discriminate between the 2 points, that is called as 2-point discrimination. The distance between the 2 points can be discriminated. So this is called as 2-point discrimination. All these sensations will be reaching the nucleus proprius. Okay, and then the joint sense and exteroceptors, that is touch and pressure sensations, will be reaching the nucleus dorsalis. So when a person touches you, okay, when he gives a pressure in you, in your limb and all, it will be reaching the nucleus dorsalis, that is the dorsal nucleus in the spinal cord, and that is the Clark's column. Okay, and also the visceral afferent nucleus, it receives the visceral afferents from the dorsal nerve roots. Okay, these are the main functions. So again, there's a revision. These are the rexed laminas. The posterior horn from lamina 1 to lamina 6 will be occupying the posterior horn of gray matter, whereas in the anterior horn of gray matter, we have only the lamina 8 and 9. The lamina 7 will be occupying the intermediate part between the anterior horn and the posterior horn. The lamina 7 will be situated, and then lamina 10 is nothing but the substantia gelatinosa centralis around the central canal. This is according to the Rexit classification, and these are the location of the nucleus in the anterior horn and then posterior horn. So anterior horn medially, those are the medial nucleus. Ventromedial, dorsomedial. Central group, it will be a phrenic nerve nucleus, and also we have the accessory nucleus. And then lateral group, ventrodorsal, and then dorsolateral, and also we have the retrodorsal nucleus in the anterior groups. And then in the posterior horn, it is posterior marginal nucleus, substantia gelatinosa, nucleus proprius, visceral afferent nucleus, and then Clark's column nucleus. We have 5 nucleus in the posterior horn. Coming to the lateral horn. In the lateral horn, we have only 2 nucleus. Okay. Where is the lateral horn situated? Lateral horn is actually situated only in the thoracic segments and also in the upper lumbar segments. Okay. Only in the upper lumbar segments, we have this lateral horn. Okay. In the lateral horn, we have the nucleus. One is intermedio-medial and then intermedio-lateral. It's occupying the intermediate area, no. So it is divided into intermedio-medial and intermedio-lateral. What is this nucleus going to do? We have seen anterior horn, it is concerned with motor, and then posterior horn, it is concerned with sensory. What is the lateral horn doing? So the lateral horn will have the sympathetic nervous system. We have the thoracolumbar outflow for the sympathetic nervous system. For the parasympathetic nervous system, we have the sacral outflow. Okay, sacral outflow of neurons. The neurons from here, they will have a connection with the sympathetic plexus of nerves. Okay, sympathetic plexus, the flight and fright reactions. So when we are sitting in the examination hall during the viva and all, when the examiner asks questions, and during all this exam period, we'll be having the sympathetic nervous system. Our sympathetic system will be activated during all the exam periods. That is fright and then flight reactions. That is also when you are walking in a road, suddenly a dog is barking at you, and then the dog is going to trace you. Okay, so that time the sympathetic nervous system will be activated. That is during fright and all, your all the sympathetic nervous system will be activated. You'll be getting palpitations, sweating, and then increased heartbeat, and then you'll be having increased salivation, increased secretions and all. All this will happen during the exam period and during the fright reactions and all flight reactions. So sympathetic nervous system. Okay, what happens to the parasympathetic? So I am taking a boring lecture now, so you are feeling very bored. So also you'll be having evening snacks and evening tea and all. You'll feel like sleepy, no? So the parasympathetic will be active during the rest and sleep sessions. Okay, so we have the sacral outflow of neurons for the parasympathetic. For the sympathetic, it is only the thoracolumbar outflow. So all these neurons will have the relay station in the lateral gray horns, that is in the intermedio-medial and the intermedio-lateral columns. So the nerve cell groups in the lateral columns can be divided into intermedio-lateral and intermedio-medial. So intermedio-lateral, it is mainly concerned with sympathetic nervous system, that is thoracolumbar outflow. Whereas the intermediate medial groups, it will be receiving the preganglionic fibers of parasympathetic nervous system. Whenever we are talking about the autonomic nervous system or peripheral nervous system, they should have a link between the spinal cord and the cerebral cortex. So we are just thinking, we are just reading about all these connections here. How a motor neuron, how a sensory neuron, it is reaching the spinal cord. From the spinal cord, how it is reaching the cerebral cortex. We are just reading all these things in detail. That's all. Okay. So whenever when I talk about the gray column, it is only the information. That is the nucleus. It is receiving all the informations here. Okay. It is only the sensory informations are related, and then motor outputs are produced. So now going on to the white matter. Okay. Now going on to the white matter. Before that, I'll show you a video. So in last class, I was talking about the external features of. Sorry, this video is not playing. Okay, in next class, I'll be showing you that video. That is nothing but the. 1 second. So it is nothing but the external features of the spinal cord. So that video I'll be sharing with you. I'll be sharing with you later on. Now it is not playing here. Okay, I'll be going on to the white matter. So the white matter of the spinal cord. I have completed about the gray matter here. And then now I am going to talk about the white matter. So when I was talking about the white matter, it is composed of mainly the axons. Okay, it is composed of axons. So the axons, they are grouped as bundles of fibers. It is the white matter mainly consists of nerve fibers, the large proportion of them being myelinated, giving it a white appearance. So moving on to the next slide. Once again. So when we are talking about gray matter, it is divided into anterior horn, lateral horn, and then posterior horn. So the same way, the white matter also, it is divided into 3 funiculus, 3 columns, 3 white columns, or 3 funiculus. Okay, we have the posterior funiculus, lateral funiculus, and anterior white funiculus. So this is the anterior median fissure, and then posteriorly we have the posterior median sulcus and posterior median septum. So the posterior funiculus or posterior white column is the area between the posterior median septum and posterior horn. This area is called as posterior white column, or otherwise called as posterior white funiculus. And the area between the posterior horn and the anterior horn, this part is called as lateral white funiculus. And the area between anterior horn and anterior median fissure, it is the anterior white funiculus. We have both ascending tracts and descending tracts occupying all these funiculus areas. Okay, we have both ascending and the descending tracts occupying on either side of this white matter and occupying all these funiculus things. Okay, so this is about thing. So this blue marked thing is the, what is that? Posterior funiculus. What is this green marked area? This is the lateral funiculus. What is this pink marked area? It is the anterior funiculus, anterior white column. So we have the ascending tracts and the descending tracts on either way. Okay. So mostly this posterior white column, no. Posterior, in the start of the session itself, I told you, you should remember certain things. That is, gray matter is composed of nerve cell bodies. White matter is composed of axons. Same way, posterior means it is mostly sensory. Anterior means it is mostly motor. Either it is a gray matter or white matter, both the anterior thing will be having only the motor things. Okay, so anterior gray column, it will have the motor efferent neurons, whereas the anterior funiculus, it will be having the tracks, motor descending tracks. The descending tracks will be occupying the anterior aspect, whereas the ascending tracks, that is the sensory things, they will be occupying the posterior white columns. So mostly posterior means sensory, anterior means they are motor, and then lateral means it is composed of both mixed nerves. That is, both motor and sensory will be mixed in the lateral white columns. So the anterior white columns are joined together by a white commissure. So this is the anterior white commissure. In the gray matter, we have seen, no, there is a gray commissure. This is a transverse gray commissure in the gray matter. Same way, in the white matter, we have the anterior white commissure. We have the anterior white commissure through which the neurons, the axons from this side will be crossing to that side. There will be crossing of fibers. No, in the spinal cord level itself, the axons will be crossing from one part to another. Okay, so this crossing will happen at the anterior white commissure. That is what the anterior white column are joined together by the white commissure. Each white column is made up of tracts, which is either ascending tract or descending tract. In general, posterior white column is sensory. The anterior column is motor. The lateral column is mixed, that is motor as well as sensory. Further, the ascending tracts are located towards the periphery. Okay, so that is the ascending tracts. Mostly the ascending tracts will be situated in the peripherally. Peripherally only we will be seeing the ascending tracts and all. Whereas the descending tracts, it will occupy the central positions. Most of the central position of the white columns are occupied by the descending tracts. Okay, the ascending tracts, it will occupy the peripheral position, whereas descending tracts, it will occupy the central position. This is again about the white matter of the spinal cord. Only the white matter, the blue color are all the ascending tracts. The red marked things are the descending tracts. Okay, so this is posterior white column, lateral white column, and then anterior white column. Okay, and then these are the blue marked things are the ascending tracts, the red marked things are the descending tracts. Same way, when we are reading about the nucleus and the gray matter and all, we are going to name these tracts one by one. First, we'll be seeing about the posterior column tracts. Okay, the tracts in the posterior column. What are the posterior column tracts? In medicine also, they'll be asking, when there is a posterior column lesions, what happens? Okay, so when we know about the location of the tracts only, we'll be knowing what is the importance of these things. Okay, most of the posterior column is occupied by fasciculus cuneatus and fasciculus gracilis. Fasciculus means bundles of nerve fibers. The fasciculus, funiculus, and then tracts, bundles, all these have a same meaning. Okay, fasciculus cuneatus. The lateral part, we have the fasciculus cuneatus, and medially we have the fasciculus gracilis. This fasciculus gracilis, it will be carrying the sensory information. These are the ascending tracts. No, ascending means what? They should be carrying the sensory information. They carry general sensation from the lower limb. Which one? Gracile fasciculus. The gracile fasciculus or fasciculus gracilis carries general sensation from the lower limb, lower part of the body. Whereas the general sensation from the upper part of the body, that is from the upper limb, it is carried by the fasciculus cuneatus. Ascending tracts. Okay, so these will be carrying the tracts till the cerebral cortex level. From the periphery, it reaches this area. Okay, it will be reaching the spinal cord area. From here, these tracts will be ascending, and then it will reach the cerebral cortex. We have the cerebral cortex, it will reach the primary sensory area. Okay, and then moving on to the lateral white column, ascending tracts. Ascending tracts in the lateral white column, we have the spinocerebellar tracts. This is anterior spinocerebellar, and this is the posterior spinocerebellar. When I was telling about this name itself, the endpoint should be noted. Okay, spinocerebellar. From the spinal cord, these fibers, they will go to the cerebellum. That's why they are called the spinocerebellar. So whatever thing, whenever the tract is reaching the cerebellum, it is mostly concerned with unconscious things. Okay, unconsciously we'll be doing certain movements. So these are all mediated by the cerebellum. Okay, whereas the conscious things, conscious proprioception, those are all mediated by the cerebral cortex, whereas unconscious mediation are all done by the cerebellum. So we have in the lateral white column, ascending tracts is anterior spinocerebellar and then posterior spinocerebellar. And then in the anterior white column, again, we have one more ascending tract, that is the spinothalamic. We have the anterior spinothalamic in the anterior white column, and there is a lateral spinothalamic in the lateral white column. Okay, so in the posterior white column, fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus. Lateral white column, we have the anterior spinocerebellar, posterior spinocerebellar. And then again we have the lateral spinothalamic. So these will be relaying the information up to the thalamus. So it is spinothalamic tract, lateral spinothalamic. Whereas in the anterior white column, we have the anterior spinothalamic. Okay. And then coming to the descending tracts. What are the important descending tracts we know? It is the corticospinal tracts, the corticospinal tracts, the pyramidal tracts. Okay, the pyramidal tract will be occupying the central portion of the white matter. In the lateral white column, the central portion will occupy this area. Okay, so the axons, the tracts. So these tracts are running from the cervical region to the sacral regions. Okay, so we have to trace these tracts at each level. So the lateral corticospinal, it will be coming from the primary motor area. These are the descending tracts. No, descending tracts means what? They'll be carrying the tracts from the cerebral cortex till the spinal cord level. Okay, so all these tracts from the cerebral cortex reaches the spinal cord. Okay, the lateral corticospinal occupying the lateral white column. And then we have the anterior corticospinal near the anterior median fissure on either side. This area is for the anterior corticospinal. And then we have the extrapyramidal tracts. So, the pyramidal tracts is composed of mainly the lateral corticospinal, that is lateral pyramidal tract, and then anterior pyramidal tract. And then we also have extrapyramidal. Extrapyramidal means that is from the red nucleus, from the tectum of the midbrain, from inferior olivary nucleus, from reticular formation, from all these areas, we'll be getting the tracts, descending tracts. Okay, so they are called as extrapyramidal. So one of the extrapyramidal is, this is reticulospinal. Reticulospinal means what? It is from the reticular formation to the spinal cord level, the descending tracts. And then we have the rubrospinal. Rubrospinal means what? From the red nucleus, it reaches the spinal cord, descending tract, rubrospinal. And then we have the this one, tectospinal. Tectum is situated in the midbrain, tectum, tegmentum and all. Okay, from the tectum of the midbrain, there is some fibers descending downwards to the spinal cord. They are called as tectospinal tract. And then we have the vestibulospinal tract. From the vestibular system, we have the this descending tracts reaching the spinal cord. Those are called as vestibulospinal. So when I was talking about the gray matter, when I was talking about the nucleus and all, they have the motor efferents will be from the anterior side. From the posterior aspect, it is the sensory informations are they are relaying there, like that. We have some functions. What is the functions of all these tracts here? Nothing. Same way, the ascending tracts, they will be carrying the information from the periphery through the tracts. It will be reaching the primary sensory area in the cerebral cortex. Okay, and then motor informations are carried from the cerebral cortex through the descending tracts. It will reach the spinal cord. From here, it is going to the periphery. Okay, so descending tracts, they will be carrying the information from center to periphery, whereas ascending tracts from periphery to the center. Okay, again, each tract will carry certain informations, like not all the general sensations are carried by the posterior column. Only the general sensations like pain, temperature, position sense, vibration sense, those things are carried by certain tracts. So we are going to see that in detail. Okay, so classification of tracts of spinal cord, it is broadly classified as ascending tract, descending tract, and then intersegmental. Ascending, they are sensory. Descending, they are the motor tracts. Ascending tracts, I told you, they conduct the impulses from periphery to the brain, whereas descending from the brain, it will be taken to the periphery. Okay, so this is the schematic representation. The cerebral cortex here. This is the right side of the cerebral cortex, left side of the cerebral cortex. This is the thalamic region. And then this is the spinal cord sections, cross section of spinal cord with the inner gray matter and outer white matter. And this is the dorsal root and this is the ventral root. Okay, and this is the periphery. So when you see the ascending tracts, this blue color, it is the information carried from the periphery. It will go through the sensory neurons, and then it will reach the dorsal root ganglion here. Through the dorsal root, it will be reaching the posterior horn of gray matter. From here, these fibers through the gray commissure, they will cross to the opposite side. Okay, at spinal cord level itself, these fibers, they are crossing to the opposite side. Which one? The ascending fibers. So then it ascends upwards, and then it will be reaching the thalamus. From the thalamus, it is going to the brain. Okay, here we have so many connections. from the spinal cord. At each spinal cord level, all these tracts are connected here, and then it will be reaching the medulla, pons, midbrain, and then thalamus, and then it will be related to the primary sensory area, which is present in the cerebral cortex. And some fibers will be related to the cerebellum also. For better coordination, for fine movements and all, we need the cerebellar action. So these fibers, they will have a link with the cerebellum also. Okay. So the ascending fibers from periphery to the center. What happens to the descending fibers? From primary sensory area, the information are related to the primary motor area. Here we have the connections between these areas. From primary sensory area, it receives the information in the primary motor area. From primary motor area, the pyramidal tract, we have the corticospinal. So the corticospinal pyramidal tract, it will descends the informations. Again, it will be reaching like this. At the level of medulla, it will have a decussation. We know we will be calling pyramidal decussation at the level of medulla. At the medulla, the pyramidal tract, it will cross to the opposite side. We have two types of pyramidal tract. One is lateral corticospinal, another is anterior corticospinal. Only the lateral corticospinal will cross to the opposite side at medulla. So that is called as pyramidal decussation. Okay, and then it will be reaching the, this is descending, motor, so it has to reach the anterior horn of gray column. Okay, anterior gray column. From here, through the motor neurons, this information is carried to the periphery through the ventral root. It will reach the periphery here. Okay. Okay. What happens to the anterior corticospinal? We told only the lateral corticospinal is crossing at the level of medulla. What happens to the anterior corticospinal? The anterior corticospinal also, they are the descending tracts. They'll be carrying information and then they'll be descending up to the level of spinal cord. Here, they will cross to the opposite side. So the anterior cortical spinal tract, some of the fibers, they will cross to the opposite side at the spinal cord level. Okay. Whereas lateral corticospinal, it will be having the decussation at the medulla. So again, it will be subdivided. We know the ascending tracts or sensory tracts, it is subdivided into spinothalamic, ascending from the spinal cord to the thalamus. Anterior spinothalamic, lateral spinothalamic. Spinocerebellar, anterior spinocerebellar, posterior spinocerebellar. Spinotectal to the tectum of the brain. Spino-olivary to the inferior olivary nucleus. Spino-reticular to the reticular formation. Fasciculus gracilis, it is carrying the information from the lower limb. Cuneatus, it is going to carry the information from the posterior aspect. Okay, and then descending tract, we have the corticospinal tract. Intersegmental tracts are nothing but the extrapyramidal tracts. Okay, this is the location. This is the fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus, and then in the lateral column we have the spinocerebellar, anterior spinocerebellar, posterior spinocerebellar, and this is the spinothalamic. The anteriorly we have the anterior spinothalamic. In the lateral white column we have the lateral spinothalamic tract. And these are the descending tracts, nothing but the corticospinal. Okay, lateral corticospinal, and here it is the anterior corticospinal, and then extrapyramidal tracts are the rubrospinal, reticulospinal, olivospinal, tectospinal. Okay, it is very interesting to know about all these things. For example, to talk about the tectospinal and talk about the vestibulospinal and all, it will be very interesting. So when you are just running in a track, okay, when you are just running in a track, suddenly you got hit by a stone. You will be losing your balance. Okay, you'll be losing your balance. You will be tending to fall, but this fall is prevented by, you will not fall. Whenever you hit a stone, you are not going to fall. You will balance yourself. No, this is actually mediated by the vestibulospinal system. That is, in the ear, we have the vestibular nerves, which will sense all these balance things. Immediately when we are losing our balance, all this system through the vestibulospinal tract, it will activate our vestibulospinal tract, and then the motor reflex, and then we'll be regaining the balance. Okay, all this is mediated by the vestibulospinal tract. And then again, the balance and the posture, it is mainly coordinated by the cerebellum. Even the cerebellum has a control over this, but also through the vestibulospinal tract, we have a control. And then to talk about the tectospinal. The tectospinal tract is mainly concerned with visual and then this orientation, visual orientation, and then neck muscle orientation. Like when I am teaching here, your roommate can enter into your room with a pizza or with a KFC chicken. Your roommate can enter into your room, and suddenly what you will do? You'll stop listening here. You'll look at the KFC chicken, and your eyes will be following the KFC chicken. Your friend will be going to the another area. You will be following the you'll be following your friend. Okay, so when your eyes are following, automatically your neck muscles are also following it. Okay, your just eyes are not following. You are following a KFC chicken, your neck muscles are also automatically following that one. Okay, this is actually mediated by the tectospinal. From the tectum and the spinal cord, we have the tectospinal tract. These are all mediated by this. Okay. So we have in the ascending pathway, there are three order of neurons. It is not directly reaching the cerebral cortex. We have the order of neurons. From the periphery, all these are carried to the dorsal root ganglion. The dorsal root ganglion is present in the dorsal root, okay, of the spinal nerve. It will reach the dorsal root ganglion. From there, the central processes will be reaching the posterior horn of the gray column, and then it will cross to the opposite side, and then it will ascend upwards and then reaches the thalamus. Till the dorsal root ganglion, it is first order neuron. From here till the thalamus, they are the second order neurons. From thalamus through the thalamic radiation, these fibers are reaching the primary sensory area of the cerebral cortex. These are the third order neurons. We have three group of neurons. Okay, through this only the informations are carried to the cerebral cortex. So this is broad classification. Tracts of spinal cord should be taken in a separate class, but I'll tell you simple things about this. I told you, the ascending tracts, that is the lateral spinothalamic, they will be mainly carrying the pain and temperature sensation. Anterior spinothalamic, they carries only the light touch and the pressure. Spinocerebellars, they are mainly with the unconscious thing. Cerebellum means unconscious things. Okay. And then tactile, I told you, tactile, that is visuomotor reflex. And then we have the spino-reticular tract around about the emotion component. Like when a person, if he falls unconscious and all, what we will do, we'll be splashing the water in his face, and otherwise we'll be touching his face. Okay, cheek and all will be touching, and then we'll ask him to awake. Okay, so what is this we are doing? The splashing of water in the face and all, this will be activating the reticular system, which has a reticular tracts and all. All these tracts will be stimulated, and then it will awaken us. Okay, so the reticular formation, they have a close thing with the emotion and then arousal, memory and all. Okay, the reticular formation. And then fasciculus, gracilis, and cuneatus, they carry the general sensations, mainly the joint sense, vibration, 2-point discrimination, conscious proprioception and all. Posterior column. Posterior column, it's mainly concerned with joint, vibration, 2-point discrimination, conscious proprioception, stereognosis. Very important in your medicine classes. So again, the ascending tracts, facile gracilis, it will be carrying the general sensation from the lower limb. Cuneate fascicle from the upper limb. Spinocerebellar, mainly concerned with balance and posture. Okay, and then we have the spinothalamic system. They are carrying the pain and temperature. Okay, the lateral spinothalamic, mainly the lateral spinothalamic is concerned with pain and temperature. Anterior spinothalamic, it is concerned with touch and pressure. So coming back to the clinical scenario, we have to get the answers. No, a 21-year-old man was involved in head-on collision. When removed from his sports car, he is complained of loss of sensation and voluntary movement in lower limb. Even when there is a lesion at the C6 or C7 level, at this level of spinal cord, we have all the tracts. Not only at this level, at all the spinal segments, we have the white matter, gray matter, and then we have all the tracts. Okay, so when there is an injury, actually the spinal cord is situated within the vertebral column, and then we have the body of the vertebra and the vertebral arch components protecting the spinal cord. When there is an injury to the vertebra, it will injure the spinal cord. When there is an injury posteriorly or anteriorly, it is going to injure the spinal cord. Okay, when the spinal cord is compressed, when the spinal cord is injured, it will be injuring all the white matter. All the tracts of the white matter are injured. All the gray column nucleus are injured. So whenever there is a lesion, okay, at the upper level, that is at the cervical region and all, it is going to completely transect all these tracts. All these tracts are going to be affected. So that's why there is loss of general sensation in the lower limb, because the lower limb sensations are carried by the posterior column mainly. Okay. And then the spinocerebellar also, it is mainly concerned with balance and then posture. The pain and temperature sensation is carried by the spinothalamic. So when there is an injury to all these things, everything is affected. All the tracts are affected. That's why the patient is complaining of loss of sensation. They are telling us a general sensation. But these sensation includes joint sense, vibration sense, position sense, proprioception, conscious proprioception, and also about the pain and temperature. And then we have the touch and pressure sensation. All these are lost. Okay, because all the tracts are lost, all the tracts are injured, all these are lost in the lower limb, and also the voluntary control. Not only the sensation, we have the voluntary control because the descending tracts, the corticospinal tract is also injured now. That's why the voluntary movement is also affected in the lower limb. And then because at the C6, C7 level, we have the brachial plexus of nerves, it is injured, and then upper limb movements is going to be affected. So we got an answer for this. Okay. And then some clinical correlation will be syringomyelia. Syringomyelia is nothing but the fluid-filled cavity around the central canal, which will be affecting the spinothalamic tract alone. When the lateral spinothalamic tract is affected, the pain and temperature sensation is alone lost. There will be dissociated sensory loss. Not the entire sensation is affected. This is just a fluid-filled cavity around the central canal. So only this area, only one tract is affected. That is the white column. That is the lateral spinothalamic is affected. So pain and sensation alone is lost in case of syringomyelia. What is Brown-Sequard syndrome? To understand this, you have to know about the tracts of spinal cord in detail, because some of the tracts, they will cross to the opposite side. Some tracts, they will ascend or descend without crossing to the opposite side. Okay, only when you know about all these things in detail, you'll be understanding about the Brown-Sequard syndrome. At present, when there is a lesion involving the part of a spinal cord, you have to know that is there will be ipsilateral loss and also contralateral loss will be there. Which fibers are crossing? When the fibers cross at this level, there will be contralateral loss. If the fibers doesn't cross, there will be only ipsilateral loss of all the sensations. Okay, it is called as hemisection of spinal cord or Brown-Sequard syndrome. And then one more thing is Tapes dorsalis. Tapes dorsalis is nothing but the syphilis. In case of syphilis and all, there will be degenerative lesions involving the posterior column. Posterior column means what? The posterior column, it is mainly concerned with funiculus cuneatus and funiculus gracilis, which is going to carry all the general sensation from the lower limb and the upper limb. So there is loss of position, vibration sense, 2-point discrimination, conscious proprioception in the lower limb. Okay, it is characterized by impairment of proprioceptive sensibility, the loss of tactile discrimination. All this will be affected. And in the posterior column lesions, the patient will become ataxic. That is, he will be having an ataxic gait, mainly when he closes his eyes. Okay. Then coming to the pyramidal tract lesions. Pyramidal tract lesions, before the decussation, if the lesion occurs, it will be called as upper motor lesions. But after the decussation, if the lesion is there locally at the spinal cord, it is called as lower motor lesions. Okay. As a result, the tone of muscles is increased and then there will be spastic paralysis. That's all. Thank you.
That was a wonderful session, madam. Actually, those paper models are nice. The diagrams that you explained about the embryology of spinal cord.
Yeah.
That was very nice, madam. So I thank all the delegates on behalf of SNO Tamil Nadu for attending this webinar. And the next webinar will be next month probably, and will be continuation of the neuroanatomy. Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello, Debalina.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Is there any doubts from the delegate side?
No, sir. We haven't received any doubts yet.
Yeah. Then fine. You can close the session.
All right, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Debalina.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.